TJ by George Ding. Will never told me that his father died. I found out just like everyone else. One day he was fucking around in history class, making paper airplanes out of his textbook and throwing them when Mrs. Lawrence wasn't looking, and the next day he was gone. Mrs. Lawrence, who was a piss-poor orator, stood in front of the room, twisting a piece of chalk nervously between her fingers, and muttered something about a heart attack and our prayers. The next day, Will was back in class laughing and throwing shit as if nothing had ever happened. But at lunch, he handed each of us, Sean, John, and myself, a plain white envelope sealed with a plain white sticker. He never mentioned his father, and none of us were willing to bring it up. Will's father was a former CIA operative who served in Eastern Europe during the end of the Cold War. He took a desk job in D.C. when Will was born and retired a few years later. When I met Will in Ms. McAllister's third-grade English class, his father was just another stay-home parent who took us out for ice cream on the weekends. Using the fake passports his father had collected, Will and I would play spies, assuming the identity of his father's alter egos. I was a former Russian intelligence officer named Viktor Ivanovich, and Will was the famed East German physicist, Dr. Henrik Stein. For a while, it was just me and Will, but the two of us met Sean and John in middle school. Sean had the biggest TV I had ever seen. Both of his parents were doctors, so he always had the newest toys and the best games. John was a quiet kid, but had a hell of a work ethic. You could always count on him to do the work, so if you were up late procrastinating, 10 minutes with John before class and you'd be set. I remember joking with Will that the four of us formed the perfect gang. If Will was the muscle, and I was the reason, then Sean was the money, and John the brains behind it all. The four of us went to a high school called TJ. Its full name is long and unimportant. It's a magnet school in Northern Virginia, and rated one of the best high schools in the nation. The average SAT score of TJ's graduating class hovers around 1450, a full 400 points higher than the national average. It's a school that emphasizes performance and success above all else. The year Will's father died, we were seniors. We had taken all our tests and sent in all our essays, and were just waiting to hear back. The feeling that your life was distilled down to a bunch of numbers and bubbled-in letters overwhelmed us. When I heard that Will's father had passed away, I remember thinking that maybe life was truly meaningless after all. When I got to Will's house, most of the guests had left already. Will and Sean were on the front porch, smoking a joint. "You're late," Will said. He handed me the joint, and I took a long drag. "Sorry, dinner went a little long." Just then, John's car pulled up in the driveway. John stepped out, wearing his Blockbuster polo and name tag. He fumbled with the name tag as he walked up to us. Will glanced at him. "You missed the hors d'oeuvres, but there's still some scotch left." John shook his head. "I didn't come for that. I wanted to see your mom." He made for the door, but Will blocked his way. "You don't want to see her." "It's not about what I want. I came to offer my condolences." "I'll take your condolences." "Will, come on," John said, pleading. Will stared at him for a second, then moved out of his way. "Suit yourself." We found Will's mother slouched in the recliner, the same puffy chair Will's father claimed whenever we came to watch movies. But now there was only this thin, wiry woman, her gray hair strung back into a tight bun, eyes darting this way and that, but never settling. John sat down across from her, and her eyes shifted toward him. "Miss Avery?" John said, and her eyes moved again. She squinted, frowned. Who is it? She said, raising her arms in front of her, but grasping only air. It's me, John. John? She said it as if she had never heard the word before. Will's friend. Her posture relaxed. Oh, yes, Will. He should be back any minute now. Will had already come in and stood on the other side of the room, shaking his head. Told you, he said, and motioned for us to go. John looked deep into Will's mother's eyes, searching for any part of her that he still recognized. Miss Avery, I'm so sorry, he said, but she did not seem to hear. Outside, Sean was on the phone. I could tell he was talking to his girlfriend, Julie. There was a certain ingratiating tone his voice took on only when he talked to her, like he was constantly trying to smooth things over. What do you want from me, Jules? It's a wake, for Christ's sake. I can't exactly get up and leave. He saw us coming out and ended the conversation. Look, I've got to go. I'll call you later. Love you. As we came down the steps to the driveway, John said to Will, Are you sure your mom is going to be all right? Maybe you should take her to see someone. A dog barked in the neighbor's yard. It was Marcy, Mrs. Henderson's old gray terrier. Both the dog and its owner had seen better days. When Will and I were spies, we used to pretend that Marcy was a guard dog and run like hell whenever she chased us. Presently, Will told Marcy to shut up. Will, I'm serious, John said. I think your mom needs help. Marcy kept on barking. Will stared at John and looked like he was about to say something, but instead he grabbed a few rocks from the gravel driveway and threw them at Mrs. Henderson's home. Shut up, you fucking mutt, he screamed. A window on the second floor flew open, and Mrs. Henderson yelled from it. William Francis Avery, what in God's name do you think you're doing? I'm sorry, Mrs. Henderson, Will called, making his voice sound as apologetic as possible. Will turned to the rest of us and muttered something under his breath. We all stared at him, unsure of what to do. Will unlocked the door to his father's car. Get in, he said. We drove to the strip mall parking lot that was our old haunt. It was the place we spent restless nights doing anything but homework, although John would secretly bring his and do it when we weren't looking. It was there that we lit up the night before the SATs, and it was there that we set ground rules for racing through standardized tests. Will's best time was 8 minutes on a 60-question exam, where he bubbled in all C's. But he did so well on the other sections, he still ended up in the 90th percentile. Will took out a case of beer from his trunk, and I rolled up another joint. We sat there talking about college of all things, and what our greatest memories of high school were. It was scary to think that soon it would all be over. 4 years of our life became 3 or 5 or 10 envelopes that we sent out to California, Georgia, Texas. Will wanted to work in the footsteps of his father and planned to join the army, then work his way over to intelligence. Though his grades weren't amazing, Sean's father had graduated from Harvard and his mother from Johns Hopkins, so he was gunning for those two. John's family wasn't exactly wealthy, so he tried for any school that would offer him a scholarship. And me? I was more or less in the same boat as John. While we were talking, a cute brunette walked past us, and our conversation dropped off. That's what we were like back then. Will seemed to know her, though, and called out, Stephanie? The girl stopped and turned around. Will, how are you? She walked over to us and gave Will a quick hug. I recognized her now. Stephanie Richards, member of the dance team and vice president of the homecoming committee. Someone you'd see in a lot of yearbook photos. Want a drink? A smoke? Will said, holding out a beer. Stephanie looked back at her car, hesitating. Come on, I'll drive you home. I live all the way in Falls Church, she groaned. That's right near me, Will said. It's no problem at all. And maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe it was his nonchalant attitude, but Will convinced Stephanie to come along. A smile spread across her face, like she knew she'd regret coming with us, but wanted to anyway. The five of us drank and talked for a while, then got in the car. Stephanie sat in the back, scrunched between John and me. Her skirt kept riding up as she squirmed back and forth, revealing a patch of smooth skin. Will handed her a joint. So, what do you want to be when you grow up, Stephanie? Will asked. A doctor, a lawyer? She finished a sip of beer and said, Nope, a biologist. Isn't that a coincidence? That's what John here wants to be, too. Stephanie glanced at John, who gave her a timid look. I think I remember you from AP Chem, she said. John shrugged, and Stephanie leaned forward, craning her neck to the driver's seat. What do you want to be when you grow up, Will? We all thought we knew what Will was going to say. A spy, a soldier, a man like my father. But he just licked his lips and said, I don't know. Rich, I guess. Once we were back in his neighborhood, Will slowed down and parked the car by the side of the road. The wheels slid off the asphalt and onto the mud. Night had fallen and a chill came over us. Stephanie was pretty wasted. She giggled at nothing in particular and kept leaning against me and John for support. So when Will said, Will you gentlemen please excuse me and Stephanie for a moment? We all knew what was going on. Sean, John, and I got out and closed the doors as Will climbed into the back seat. We walked down the dirt shoulder, away from the car, which began to shake. There was something so wrong about the situation. We had done some crazy shit before, stolen some donuts from a dumpster, hurled eggs at houses, lit a bunch of fireworks on the lawn of a Korean girl we hated, but nothing like this. We waited on the shoulder for a good 5 minutes. Above the gusts of wind, a faint moaning could be heard. John was the first to speak. What's wrong with Will? Nothing, Sean said. The guy's in mourning. I've never seen anyone mourn like that, I said. And what would you know about it? The guy's pissed. I would be too if my friends blew off my father's wake. I was at work, John was quick to point out. Sean turned to me. And what's your excuse? I was studying, I said. You're fucking with me, right? You were studying? His eyes were judging me. I knew that I could never take it back, but I said it anyway. Not everyone's father can buy their son into college. John was stunned. Instead of responding, Sean got up and walked back to the car, where Will emerged from the back seat, shirt unbuttoned, smoking a cigarette. Will gave Sean a high five, and Sean climbed into the car, closing the door behind him. Will walked over to us as the car began to shake again. How was it? I said, barely able to keep the venom from my voice.